Hello and welcome to Echelon's Rocketship Experience. And today we're discussing how will Sri Lanka grow? A business leader's perspective. And in the studio with us are three of Sri Lanka's top leaders. We have Channa Silva, who is the chairperson of Sarvodaya Development Finance, Ravi Jayawardena, who's Group Chief Executive of Maliban, a foods company, and Kumudu Gunasekera, who's a managing director at the global consultancy firm Stax. Welcome all to the Rocketship Experience. How will Sri Lanka grow? So that's the question in front of the business leaders we have here in the studio, and we have a diversity of backgrounds and experience. So I'm thinking there'll be a diversity of opinions. And Kumudu, big picture guy, consultant. So I'll start with you, right? That's a logical place, I think, to start with. And there is, Sri Lanka's challenges are manifold and somewhat graspable now. Over time we've begun to understand what these challenges are, and we've seen the implications. You are a solutions person. You cannot go into a company as a consultant and talk about, okay, in 5 years, let's do this transformation. You have to give results in weeks, in months, and in 1 year. I don't think you can have a horizon much further than that. If you apply that consultancy mindset to Sri Lanka, what are your thoughts? What are those first things we can do?
Yeah, no, thank you, Shamindra, for having me. Unfortunately, it's not a short-term solution that we should be focusing on. If we go with that mindset, I think we are going to be at the same spot in another 3 to 4 years.
Right.
So you shouldn't hire consultants then. But I think it should be a long-term, it's an opportunity for us because we have now really, we had an equilibrium set, before. All of this has brought our equilibrium to a new level. We have to adjust to that equilibrium as a people and then find solutions that we can slowly but sustainably build that equilibrium to a better position. To me, solutions that, with all the structural reforms the government is talking about, the scary part and what we should safeguard against is how do we not borrow money again unsustainably.
Right.
That's number one. So we need to have safeguards for that.
Sure.
Number two, how do you maintain a healthy balance or foreign reserve? That's number two. I think those two are critical for us. So for me, one solution for that is we need to have a legislative mandate that says there is a threshold in terms of borrowing, and maybe GDP to debt to GDP ratio, have a threshold, and beyond that you can't go for any government, anybody who comes into power. And the same thing for foreign reserves, have a threshold, and you can't go beyond that. So to me, I think we need to have these safeguards, and there may be many other safeguards that we can come up with, but we need to have safeguards that we don't get back into this position, because otherwise we'll become like Argentina, where we continue to go up and down and up and down and up and down. So we have to really avoid
at constitutional level, such thresholds may have to be spelled out, I suppose.
Yes, so that you can't change those thresholds by one individual or one government.
Right. So Kumudu's response, Channa, has been that there is no easy solution, right? I'm not suggesting that you have an easy solution for this, but from your vantage point, which is kind of different, because from Sarvodaya Development Finance, you have many customers across the country. What are those opportunities, or where are those starting points to fix the challenges we are facing?
Thank you, Shamindra. So one of the key aspects that we are seeing is that the escalation of the interest rates when the government is borrowing north of 30%, it seems, some quarters are saying you have to be basically doped to be borrowing at figures of over 30%. So it is, when that sort of benchmark is established, the other borrowers which are to follow, at the SME level, at the micro level, it becomes staggering. So this is, leave alone sustainability of business, just doing business on a daily basis becomes basically impossible. So the high borrowing cost for the government, I think we have to relook at the entire equation afresh. Some of these theories are Western-driven, Western-oriented, grown economies, very stable economies, very big economies. How relevant is it to small countries like Sri Lanka has to be relooked at it. For example, Treasury, mainly Treasury borrows from the banks, from the insurance companies, from the retirement funds. So it's mainly captive funds you're borrowing. So if you give them 5 to 7% less than what you're borrowing now, will they come? And the answer is most likely that they will come, because most of the funds are coming because it's mandatory. So what is also happening is there's overcrowding effect taking place in the government, and for the last 14 months consecutively, including this month, government has overborrowed from the private sector. There's over ₹1 trillion borrowed, more than the private sector in entirety. So you're basically, and that's a phenomena that the country has not seen for a long time. I think after 1983, it's for the first time we are seeing that the government is borrowing more than the private sector. So this is really hampering the SME sector. I can tell you the SMEs are bleeding. The micro guys are even doing badly than that. And if we do not correct this position fairly quickly, I think there will be no tomorrow for them. So after a while, you can enter a stage of paralysis for SMEs, and when you enter that, reviving them is going to be a daunting task, and it's not going to happen quickly.
So you're essentially picking up where Kumudu left off, and you're talking about the crowding out effect of the government's, overborrowing in the economy. You're suggesting the government now has borrowed more than the private sector collectively has done currently, right? Ravi, you are the guy with your hands in the real economy. You are one person with the real economy. You have consumers at the other end of your products, who may be giving you good indications of what the challenges are. If you approach this from a private sector business point of view, not just defining the problem, but how do we get about looking for those solutions, quick ones or long-term ones? Which are the ones that you have on the top of your mind?
I think, I am just applying, if you run a company or a country, the fundamentals remains the same. Right. Let's say, for example, as a country, there are two ways you can look at it, how to improve the overall the income, right? And then how to reduce the cost. Like as a company, we look at the same thing. Cost efficiency is one part of it, and then on top of the revenue increase. So that with today's situation, what we have seen, the consumers are struggling. I fully agree with Kumudu and Channa. The smaller guys are struggling. Like I'll give you the biscuit landscape. Out of 35 companies, the two top guys we don't have much of an issue, but the small chaps are really struggling. So that's applied across. So what happens is that as a country, if you take still about 60% of our GDP contribution comes from the service sector. We are in manufacturing. I think manufacturing is about 26%. That's mainly coming from the garment sector. But what we have seen, our input cost is very high. So Sri Lanka 5 years down the line cannot be a very good manufacturing hub with this current cost structure. Extremely not. It's out.
Can you explain high input costs? That's one of the problems contributing to your, FDI decisions on investment will rely on input costs. Why do you say they are high? Give us a sense about what that.
I'll take one example. Our input cost in terms of raw material is mostly imported. Even take flour, of course, the wheat is imported. So there is a forex direct link, sugar, all that, margarine. And then electricity, for example, conversion cost is very high. And then if you take, I'm not going out, just take the region. We have checked with two countries. The cost, you can run the same recipe at 70% cost.
Wow.
So you see that as in the manufacturing, unless you have in the garment sector where you have completely a different dimension, But they also definitely, what I've heard is maybe going to another country for manufacturing, maybe a more better option than here. But I think we have to play to our strength. Our strength is service sector, and when you say the service sector, take tourism for example. Is that I'm just taking one example. No point of promoting tourism, spending money, unless you look at a very holistic, consistent picture, right? And it is not that change of governments should change the policy of the country, right? Because if it's a short-sighted policy, they will try to take a popular decision, but not the most right decision. If you take the developed countries, take Singapore, you don't have to go far. Singapore leaders took the right decision, sometimes painful to people. One of my friends who is in England, he said that we are paying 50% taxes, right, from salaries. I'm very happy because I know that money is not being wasted. But if you ask a Sri Lankan who is paying pay tax and they say, oh, this been money been, you can't tell the same answer. So this is something the country has to look at it. So the revenue generation, also it's you take, life is all about, or a company you to play to your strength. Sri Lanka's strength is the service sector. You have to have a very good blueprint that is for 20 years. I take dairy, for example. India is dairy market is 100% self-sufficient. Now that's 1.3 billion, one of the largest countries in the world. Sri Lanka with 20 million people, we are not even 35% in dairy. We are importing. The difference, India had a consistent policy for the last 30 years in dairy. Change of governments, so you have to have anything. That's the governance and consistency in policy is very important. Now we are going for IMF now. There's everybody, IMF is a buzzword. But I heard we have gone to 15 times to IMF. This can be the 16th time. So that also is a very temporary plaster they are putting. So since we are now hit the rock bottom, we can't, I think, go beyond this. Now it's the right time to do the right things.
So in a sense, what you're suggesting, Ravi, is for manufacturing, we are not cost competitive. As a result, it's not likely to be a magnet for attracting investment. On services, we can win, provided we have consistency in policy. And this is a recurring theme in this country about the policy inconsistency, right? So Kumudu, I'm coming to you, and you put down for us the fundamentals, I suppose, of being sustainable. Government debt needs to be sustainable, reserves need to be comfortable. If not, we create an unstable foundation on which to grow on. And I'm asking you to, so let's put that next layer on that foundation, okay?
Sure.
Assuming we put that, the basics in place, what is that next layer going to be like?
Yeah, and for that, to me, you look at the root cause of the problem. So in any society, there's 4 pillars. There's the politicians, there's a civil service, there's a private sector, and then there's a civil society. So there are 4 different pillars. Now, in the 60s, 70s, our civil service was very strong. That has eroded. Our civil society today is relatively strong. So out of the 4 pillars, the civil service has gone down. Political landscape, I will let you guys decide where we stand on that. And then the private sector is also relatively strong. I'm saying relatively because I'll get to that. So we need to create the right environment for all 4 of these pillars to become productive to society. Right. Now, how do you make that? Now, civil society, for example, if you create the right environment, all 4 pillars have really good people, smart people, not having the right opportunity or the environment to really flourish and help the country. I said about private sector is relatively good because I think private sector also has to take some of the blame for this, because especially after the war, the private sector saw per capita consumption go up. Because of the war, there was spending going up. So the private sector started investing in domestic consumption and forgot about exports. Now, if there's a nice graph, I forget where it was, where Vietnam and Sri Lanka GDP ratio to export to GDP ratio was the same. And then it's like a V. Vietnam has
Everyone
gone
took
up
off.
and Sri Lanka is down. Who's to blame for that? That's not the government or the civil service. It's a private sector because we went after short-term gains where we really focused on domestic consumption. So I think that's something that now companies have recognized and are really focusing on export-oriented growth. So that's how you build the private sector can really contribute. Civil society is good, and then civil service to me is the critical element, because when we were back in the day, our parents' generation, when you were a civil servant, you were the top of the food chain, the smartest and the brightest guys. We need to make them strong so that they are independent and they run the country, whereas politicians help govern the country, not execute on policies. So to me, those 4 pillars need to really be strengthened if we are to come out of this.
Channa, that's a wonderful perspective that Kumudu just put there, about those pillars. And your organization has its roots in the civil society. You are a private sector organization also. So you see the intermingling of these two forces across the country. How healthy is that connection, is that relationship, particularly between private sector and civil society? Is there opportunity out there? How do we make the most of this?
Yes. So I think we need to relook at at least the fundamental tenets of some of the most important things that we deal with. And I'd like to reflect on one is tax, for example. In regards to tax, we've realized going out of Colombo, people's ability to pay VAT, people's ability to calculate VAT at the SME level, at the grassroots level, is non-existent. So, and we have been continuously discussing about VAT, and there's been VAT frauds in this country in big amounts, and we are still sticking with VAT. So I think, whether, for example, in this instance, whether we can move into sales tax, a small 1% sales tax, instead of VAT, which is very tedious to calculate, it is monotonous, and it is not been done. Everyone knows out of Colombo it's not been practiced. So some of these fundamentals have to be revisited. And the big picture is that, for example, the state-owned enterprises, 500 of them are bleeding like no tomorrow, and the civil society is like waiting to see, can you repair 10 and show us? Can you repair 20 and show us? And that moments are not there, so we as a society is embedded in talking and talking and talking relentlessly and without any real outcome, And I think this, as stakeholders, government is also quite happy with this conversation, because finally they are the beneficiaries, government in the sense, but the political leadership, the political hierarchy, because, when you look at their intentions, they want to put their people into state-owned enterprises, they want their board directors into state-owned enterprises, advisors will come from their families. So for the political relevance and for the political continuation of their political career, some of these things have to continue the same way, and they are continuing the same way. So then you come to the notion, who can challenge it? Because they are not going to challenge themselves. Who can challenge it? So I think it comes back to the bureaucracy and the civil society to collectively come and challenge some of these very fundamental tenets of the economy and see how practical is it and how quickly can we engage in change in these elements.
So we've not only defined the fundamentals, I think, of the challenge we are facing, we've also sort of approached some potential solutions. Kumudu, you're talking about how the private sector needs to be looking out versus being inward. Channa, you're talking about fundamental changes to how we approach debt and tax. Ravi, you're painting the picture of how service sector potentially coming from the manufacturing sector, you're suggesting the future is in services, right? And I'm asking you to look at investment, FDI, because Sri Lanka is currently, if the state is overcrowding the private sector, then where is that if we are to grow out of this, we need investment. How do we start addressing, besides the fundamentals, how do we start addressing the investment landscape? Can I come to you, Kumudu, to start with?
Sure. It's a big problem because right now, if you keep the money in the bank, you get a better interest rate globally.
Sure.
Even in the US. So it's
Right.
a time where, and I work with a lot of private equity funds. A lot of folks are kind of waiting and seeing for the next 3 months to see how everything plans out globally from a global landscape.
So because they anticipate a recession due to high inflation and stuff like
exactly. So, and interest rates are high.
Already.
So the cost of why you invest into places. But at the same time, in another 2 to 3 months, investors are looking at bargains. They see that the economy is going to slowly go down globally, and Sri Lanka for sure as well. So then there are opportunities, and there are a lot of cash-rich companies who should be investing into these distressed assets that we talk about. Now, SOEs is certainly up for investments if the government gets its act together and be able to convince the population of selling these SOEs. But without the SOEs, there's many other assets that will come into play as well. So how do you kind of invest into these as a country, but again going back to invest outward looking, not into domestic consumption? How do we invest to buy companies outside? In Bangladesh, in Myanmar, Nepal, other emerging markets. How do Sri Lankan companies like Ravi, your company Maliban, how does Maliban go and succeed in Kenya? That kind of mindset is important. And when you're looking for investments, also you can also partner with others. There are global investors looking for companies like these big companies in Sri Lanka who have the knowledge, the know-how, but not the capital to go to these markets. They'll provide the capital because they see that you guys are real experts and have proven that you all are market leaders in another emerging country. So I think that those opportunities are there. So not look directly just as money coming into Sri Lanka, but going out as well.
Ravi, the cost of capital, like Kumudu is suggesting, is high, not just in Sri Lanka, but anywhere else, because the alternatives are quite attractive.
Yeah.
You as a private sector leader, you have to make the case
Yeah.
to invest to shareholders, potential shareholders and partners. How do you make that case? If not today, how do you anticipate you will have to make this case? What is the logic you can use?
I think now we are going for a new, I'll just give an example for a completely outside food. We are going to make cancer drugs. Already we have started and we are looking for investment from outside. And we are shortlisted. One of their key concerns is, there are two key concerns. One is the stability of the country. Right, and they look at it based on the media stuff, and that's one thing. They're very, very concerned. The number two, as Kumudu very rightly said, is the domestic potential itself.
Domestic market size.
Size is a very small size. That's number two. So, and that's where, and again, in selling in rupee, the rupee overall, the value for they are investing in dollars. So ROI for them, and from our project, when they were saying, we went into details and said that at least 80% you have to export, otherwise the ROI, there's no financial, because these guys are looking at real financial numbers. So the market is small, and this is really, so the environment is not so good, so wait and see kind of thing. So I think and then they were even saying, when you enter, the processes are very cumbersome. For example, BOI, they were directly comparing with Singapore, for example. Yeah. Even Bangladesh apparently has much more easier way to foreign investors. So we have to look at those things because we are experiencing that now. It's a very potential project, but they say that we have to, as Kumudu says, this is wait and see kind of thing. So I think Sri Lanka has to understand where our pluses and minuses, starting from BOI itself, how user-friendly for foreign investments, and then what is the key advantage we can offer rather than them going to Bangladesh or Vietnam or Thailand. We have to do that, and unless there's a specific advantage, they will not come in. As a company, we have decided about during COVID, perhaps, as you very rightly said, is really to go out. We realized this is not the game. We will dominate in Sri Lanka. We have dominated 70 years, dominating next 30, 50 years.
You
It's
dominate
not
biscuits and milk powder in Sri
milk powder,
Lanka.
yeah. So, and our picture of success 5 years down the line is definitely, we discuss internally how can we make 10x, for example, if our current value is X and 10x in 5 years. Now, if you stick to the domestic market to become 10x, it's another 50-year dream. But if you do it in 5 years, it's definitely you have to, go out. And now we are working on that 10x model. It's a completely paradigm shift for us. And we know that which is achievable. We have already taken the first step on that. We are going to 2 Asian countries with some top partners. And you will see it not for first quarter next year. It will be in the news, yeah.
How do you make the case for, because the cost of capital is high, because ROE expectations then have to match that cost of capital.
Yeah.
How do you use a benchmark? What are those numbers looking like? Or are you looking more at the long term and not so concerned about the cost of capital currently?
Going out?
Going out of the country?
Yeah, so of course, it's fundamentally for us is that for any business in Sri Lanka, it's a small, we now why if you take the best, the biggest companies in the world is take US, out of 100, if you do a Google search, about 60 companies are from US base, and you have to be present in big countries. That's why I was talking to one of the top supermarket chains, global guys. He said, we will not come to Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka market is small. Now, Australia is also 22 million, but Australia is again, they say that's Woolworth and Coles is actually having 80% of the market there. So so the size of the market, if you want to grow, there should be a market to grow. With all the Sri Lanka situation, it's no rocket science. It's understandable when you're doing a 5-year plan, 10-year plan. You can focus. When we connect the dots, the last 70 years, we know what has happened to Sri Lanka. So it's easy to connect. When you connect the dots, 70 years, and we can predict the next 10 years with the current situation. So we know if you want to get that 10x model, it's in 5 years, it's a complete 100% dream within the country. So it's very clear.
Sham, can I add one thing?
Go ahead,
Sorry.
yeah.
You frame the question as cost of capital is high.
Sure.
I think that's a mindset shift as well.
Right.
Because we are always looking at Sri Lankans as debt-based growth.
Sure.
I think we as companies have to realize that there is equity-based growth as well. So you basically have, be able to give out equity in your company and not be 100% owned by and just mindset shift to recognize that 70% of $100 million company is much more more valuable than having 100% of a $10 million company. So that mindset is important. So you don't necessarily in these type of markets where the cost of capital is high, there's opportunities to bring in equity holders, and many mechanisms where you safeguard your majority share, even if you bring equity partners in.
Yeah, adding to what he's saying is that like Maliban is a 100% family-owned business, and that will be like that for 50, 100 years. But when we go out, we'll be a 20% player.
Right, you will only take
We will be very
equity.
flexible, and that's a decision we have taken. And again, like our main strength of now, what partner we are talking to, a global partner now, he's saying your biscuit quality is absolutely world class. Bring that insight. And we are actually leveraging not money. We can't leverage money with that player. So we are leveraging our 70 years of biscuit manufacturing expertise.
Sure.
They are very happy to work with us.
Right.
And they can get the best R&D guys from the world and still make a global product. But they are very much like plug and play. Okay, if we work with you, you have done it, and we are very happy. We have done the full testing of the market. And so in terms of sheer size, if you take Maliban and that, I think they are about 500 times bigger than us. You got my point. So that's something which we can leverage. Your know-how, your DNA, you can, it's everything is not rupee to rupee matching or dollar to dollar matching.
Sure. So we are talking essentially here right now about how the private sector can be more proactive think a little differently about what is going to generate growth in this climate, right? Channa, I'll come to you again. All your clients are private sector clients, households or small businesses. Dynamics are very different, I suppose. There, how do you think the cost of capital is likely to play out? It is quite high right now. I'm sure small businesses are struggling. How do we navigate out of this? What is the path out of this?
The path out of this, of course, is where the government leads it. And some part of this is the sentiments driven. So it has to come from the top of the central bank, top of the Ministry of Finance, from the top of the country. They must lead to a low interest regime. This is a closed economy, so the people don't have options of saying, Sri Lanka interest rates are coming down, let us invest overseas, because that opportunity is not there. All the windows are closed, so they are quite trapped inside, all the investors. So I think we need to somehow do our best to bring the interest rates down. And there are contributory parts to it. For example, we have a huge military and presence of forces. We have to reduce the numbers, and how can we do that? It's not easy. And one avenue is to see whether we can give foreign employment to these government servants, the public sector servants. Certain countries in the East are taking big numbers from Sri Lanka, and the doors are open. So I think before we send the private sector people, we must offer such opportunity to the government sector employees, just to bring down the burden of the government expenditure.
On the taxpayers.
Yes, taxpayers' expenditure. Now, talking of tax again, there's apparently only 138 tax files for people who pay more than 10 million rupees tax in the country. And this was stated in the parliament. I mean, it's a shocking revelation of, statistics. I mean, only 138 people have paying over 10 million rupees. I mean, if you take a walk down Colombo, 3-7, these affluent areas, and you see the wealth around those places and estimate their value, it's a staggering amount. And so no one really questions, how did you get your wealth? Even when there is big offenses, no one is asking, where did you get your wealth? Show how you derived it, show your tax file. None of that is ever been asked. And so I think we need to revisit some of these things, which are very, very fundamental, because the reason is after 35 years of, at least 30 odd years of war, people had to start with a blank sheet, basically. So 10 years ago in 2009, or now almost 13 years ago, we started with a blank sheet, right? So they had to build their capital on that sort of clean slate. And when there's high interest regimes prevailing, all that what you have earned erodes away. And with that, opportunities go away, opportunities dry up. Your inflation has now touched 70%. Food inflation has gone over 70%. And these are, staggering numbers, never heard. So people, investors, your stakeholders, others, they all shiver. The issue is, if Colombo affluent shivers, the people in the grassroots, they get pneumonia. They are so small, they are so vulnerable. Anything can happen. So that is the danger. So we need public servants, the bureaucrats, the leaders who really feel the sentiments of these people, to see they really feel the pain of these SMEs, and then they really work towards it. And none of that is being visible to the business environment. And that is that empathy, absence of empathy to build from, basically we push them to the ground, is a very, very important aspect, and I think we have to collectively do it.
Yeah, and I think that safety net, really building that the government needs to provide that safety net to this vulnerable community. I don't know the stats, but if there were 10 vulnerable people pre this crisis, now there's 1,000, right? So everybody got pushed down. So we need to provide that safety net, which the government doesn't have the money right now. But if they don't have the money, like Channa says, you have to then reduce your government spending on other some
exactly.
of the,
so there is a certain articulated economic plan about how the government intends to consolidate. That is, consolidate the budget, and that is high taxes, and obviously interest rates have gone up to tackle inflation. But all of you are pointing the spotlight on the spending and the loss-making SOEs. Do you feel that is an area that is not addressed adequately in the same way that the other areas are being tackled?
Because the issue is you're only looking at the revenue aspect. And you're trying to milk the cow with the revenue, and the issue is the affluent people and the capable people, they are going to leave the country. When there's high tax regimes and, non-favorable, when they leave, you lose hope, right? Because they don't leave alone, because they live with as a community. One will follow the other, right? So then, and they are well networked, they take away supply chains, everything. And as a result, you become very vulnerable. So it is, so we need to look at the expenditure side even before we look at the revenue side. And that seems to be totally been neglected. Last 1 year we realized our problem at least a year ago, and it seems that nothing has been done so far in regard to curtailing expenditure from the areas it's bleeding. So so we are in a very difficult position.
Okay, so I want to sharply focus on the future and what potentially, not just what the private sector can do, but what are the quick opportunities. Now we've discussed the fundamentals, we've discussed what's at the bottom that needs fixing, we've articulated well as a panel where the effort is and what is lacking in that effort. But I'll start with you, Ravi, are there things that private sector or the government can do that potentially will help move this thing much faster, much further? Low-hanging fruit, let's call it.
Yeah, I think sort of, if you're, I get it, there are no quick wins as we discussed, but if you really take the next 1 year, if you do a plan, I think in terms of, definitely now the budget is around the corner. I hope that, as Channa very rightly said, is that looking at the total expenditure. And if you take the 80-20 theory, I heard that 105 institutes are big institutes, though we talk about few always, are extremely, it's in a drain off. So at least take 20% of those where contributes 80 and has to be corrected now. Tomorrow will be too late. And that has to be, because no point of increasing VAT. We know how because at the end of the day, consumer suffers. VAT is a thing that has a direct bearing on your prices, cost of living. So you are technically not really correcting the situation. What you gather money and it goes off. Like, Warren Buffett said, no point of holding umbrella when it's raining, but if your shoes are leaking. Something very similar to that. And due to political reasons, if they are not doing it, I think not only the current government, everybody for the top leadership has to be on the same page to save the country, not to save the party or whatever. So that is the agenda should be, because if it's very sensitive, it's a people center, you can go for public-private partnerships. Like I heard that petroleum is now opening up. So there are different methods of skinning the cat, right? You give to license to private people, so the government dominance drops. That's the one. So there are methodologies of doing. They have to do that, because the collection of revenue is limited, because it's very painful to people. So you should have the right balance. If you go through the last 5 years and going forward also, if the revenue, like for us, increasing the price is the easiest thing, but it hurts people. So collecting taxes is the easiest for the government. Overnight they can do that. That's the easiest thing to do. But the most difficult thing they should touch now, of stopping bleeding. And if you do that as a total, and then I think time to come, this country, because I think 22 billion people, we generally don't get any reports on people dying without food. High resilient country, very badly managed. I was talking to one of the top brand guys about 3 years back. He said, I have worked with best brands in the world, but Sri Lanka as a brand is the best brand, but very badly handled. That you have 5 countries, 10 countries inside that people are very nice, and you can score, beautiful. That diversity is unbelievable. The way he explained, he's from UK. Our people don't really leverage that, So that's something which I would like to stress the point here.
Approach this either in the short term or the long term, Kumudu, and we are looking at solutions
Yeah.
for this, right? From a business leader's perspective, what is our growth strategy now going to be?
Yeah, I mean, the short term for me, and we've discussed this before, is tourism. I think that is, and I think we are still talking about it and not really getting the right environment again ready for tourism. But that's the fastest way to get $5 billion to Sri Lanka, and that you can do it within 12 months. So we can raise all the taxes we want, but this is the lowest hanging fruit out there. So we have to really focus, and as a country also, I think we need to, as a people, also we need to help that. So we can't say we want tourism and then do stuff that will hurt tourism. So I think as a country, we need to really help this industry grow, because that industry growing will really help us grow. So for me, the short-term thing is that. In the long term, for me, I going back to the first point I brought, I think civil service has to be built strong. We need good civil service, not civil society. So the distinction between civil society and civil service, we need to have good civil service leaders come in. And when Deacon you talked about Singapore, when he came in, the first thing he did was got all the Ivy League guys from globally to come and work in the civil service, paying CEO salaries that matching the private sector salaries. Let's do that. Let's pay the top dollar, but get the best guys in there. And there are great guys right now in the civil service. Let's bring them up. Let them flourish. If we don't build a civil service, we are going to go back into the same cycle where we are today. So a strong civil society, but a civil service, what it will do is it will have independence from the political systems. Politics govern, civil society execute and run the country. And there's continuity of policy. Channa, you talked about policy consistency. That happens if you have a strong civil society, because irrespective of the government, the policies would be run through. We used to have a very strong national planning department where everything was going through the planning department, and the country strategy was really maintained and managed through the national planning department. People are there, the processes are there. We just need to get the.
Channa, how does Sri Lanka create a growth story? I mean, we have this crisis, it's here, but how do we, when we look beyond it, what is our growth story like?
So one of the biggest strengths we have is our diaspora. So I think we need to reach to our diaspora. We have very, very capable, distinguished diaspora scattered all over the world. We need to really look at the gems, identify, handhold them and bring them to the country. And so for that, the embassies have to be doing a pivotal role. The issue with the embassies is, again, it's inundated with political appointments. Their agendas and the countries' agendas don't align themselves together. So because of that, we cannot get the maximum mileage out of that. So we need to first look at our embassies to see whether they have the correct capabilities, then reach out to our entire diaspora, which are doing business. It's not people, all of them who are living there, but just pick the real brilliant gems out of that, handle them, bring them to Sri Lanka. Second is IT and education. We've seen, IT within 10 years, people who are absolutely nowhere have been placed at the best positions around the world.
Sure.
And they can bring business back to Sri Lanka. Mm-hmm. So we really need to, the IT specialists who are in this country must work with the Sri Lankan government's educational system has to be linked to the private sector because we are churning out graduates in art streams and everywhere else. Looking out for jobs is going to be very frustrating for them. So we must quickly introduce spread IT as wide as possible in the education system, and also relate it to companies and link with companies, and also open the international arena and doors for these IT people. And some of this will take the country to a different level.
Just to add one point what Channa was saying, like the income what we talk about coming from Middle East, the people who are working, the enhancement like IT, even the people who are going, take housewives or the girls, take what I heard that three of our salary is equivalent to one Filipino girl because they speak English, for example. They're better mannerisms. So I think value added, sending value added, so add some value to these people, then their marketability will be much better. And then you get a better revenue rather than just sending the basic labor. There's something which government has to look into it. Of course, IT is at the highest level, like Bangalore for India, of course, reap the harvest. We are very strong in that. So value-added people going out always will bring a higher sort of a revenue than just the number. I think Sri Lanka at times look at the number of people.
Even nursing is another area.
Nursing.
No?
Yeah,
Nursing is another
absolutely.
area
So
which-
you have to go on that.
and also language skills. Korea is taking big time. Japan is taking big time. But we need that language. Proficiency has to be there. Otherwise, we cannot enter. So
And the root cause for this is our education system.
Yes,
So we
absolutely.
need to reform our education system, and we should ask ourselves, when was the last time our education curricula was looked into and revised? And Roger Federer famously said, staying the same is going backwards. We've stayed the same for the last 70 years.
Now, what I heard is that actually the draining of dollars, one of the key pillars, first 5 pillars, out of 5 pillars is education. People are going to Australia, England. So imagine that we bring some international universities and we can be an educational hub. People from Maldives, Bangladesh, Pakistan, because Sri Lanka is friendly. So we can be the center of education in Asia. We have that muscle to do that, rather than our people going overseas. Now you can that's what I have during the last 6 months is complete, going at a rate. So, and you are paying in dollars, per pounds, euros, etc. So why don't we bring that opportunity? Not only money going out, the money will come, and because we can create a beautiful learning environment here, and our people are educated, we have all the resources to do that.
Gentlemen, wonderful conversation. We started with the fundamentals, but we really elevated it. Any closing thoughts? Can I start with you, Channa?
I think the time is now. We need to be creative. We need to be fast. We need to tap to everyone, and we need to go with an open mind. Same old answers. These questions have been there for decades. So that's why we need creative answers. We need crispy answers, and we should not lose hope. We must give our best shot, and we must do it now.
Ravi.
I think we have to be absolutely positive in this. If we really criticize, external world, nothing will happen. What we can do as a company, as an individual, we must think what we can do within our control and do our best. Because always when you go through a bad time, a good time comes. So we have to believe in, we have to have hope. And if you give up hope, that's the worst thing. So I'm pretty confident as a country we will bounce back. That's for sure.
Kumudu,
Yeah,
last
I
words.
agree with both Chan and Ravi. I think we will bounce back. It's a great opportunity because in many ways the equilibrium has been reset, and now it's for us to slowly, sustainably grow that equilibrium. So let's not go for fast and furious, solutions, but let's go for hard and sustainable long-term solutions.
Kumudu, Ravi, Channa, great conversation. Thank you for joining the Rocket Ship.